Denver Broncos going through what Johnny didn't know to make some money on this team in 2021. So last year, obviously, a little tough. 5-11. They dealt with a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the ball. Von Miller being the biggest of those, and offensively, they had to deal with Drew Lock, which unbelievably didn't go well. So I still did all right on my bets for them. 9-4, on strong bets, which is the only one we're actually putting money on. 21-14 overall. So I was pretty good about predicting how good they were going to be. This was a team that could beat bad defenses when Drew Lock wasn't put into bad situations. He could still come through. They did have still have offensive talent. And frankly, defensively, I'm pretty excited about them. Obviously, they had a chance to be a lot better than they ended up being last year. And they got something in coach in Fangio. So that's where we are with 2020. Looking ahead, though, we're here to talk about 2021. Losses wise in the offseason, Devon Dotson didn't end up playing as much as he should have. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. Royce Freeman, Phillip Lindsay, rookie running backs from a few years ago that had their own level of success. Obviously, Lindsay being the bigger name. Neither guy they're really going to miss. Jeff Driscoll, whatever, backup quarterback. Defensively, nobody on that list you really care about. There are some snaps in there. DeMarcus Walker is a good player. They will miss, but again, overall, it's pretty whatever. Additions-wise, you bring in a new starting offensive lineman in Bobby Massey and a swing guy in Cam Fleming. And we're going to talk about all these guys individually as we go through position by position on this roster. But obviously, the biggest one there, Teddy Bridgewater, new starting quarterback. Defensively, too, you get free money in Kyle Fuller. One of the more ridiculous decisions of the offseason, him being released by the Bears and a salary cap move, which is something else. And then Ronald Darby comes over after some good years. We'll talk about him. This is the draft class. With rookies, I talk about all the time. We'll talk about how good they are once they get on an NFL field. Until then, I don't want to set expectations one or the other because we're trying to objectively make money on this team, and deciding how good a player is before they actually play is definitely not the way to do that. But this is what you're looking at for the rookie class. So let's go through this roster position by position, talk about how good they are, what they have. Number in the top right is the total number of players at that position. The number to the right of the name is where that player ranks out of that total. So Teddy Bridgewater, the 22nd best quarterback in the NFL out of 76. Teddy Bridgewater, he's fine. He has very clear strengths, very clear habits, and very clear deficiencies that those habits play into. Specifically, and a lot of this is going to be pretty common knowledge, he has a reputation for a reason. There's some guys that I fight back on that I don't think really have earned the reputation they have around the league. Ryan Fitzpatrick being a notable example of that. Teddy Bridgewater, that is not the case. He is absolutely the whole captain check, all that stuff really applies to him. He is a guy who consistently works from the line of scrimmage to like 5 to 10 yards down the field. He will take the first read in the offense very, very consistently if it's any level of open. He gets the ball out of his hands very quickly. He rarely looks to throw the ball downfield unless it is in a unbelievably positive scenario. And overall is just a guy who is going to functionally run a good offense, but is really, really limited. Like I said, he does struggle down the field, even if he does decide to throw down there for whatever reason, not particularly accurate. He really lacks arm strength. Will end up kind of throwing true like 50-50 jump balls, like he's in the backyard playing 500. I mean, he does that type of stuff. He also is really, really bad in the red zone because of his inability to truly make plays outside the structure of an offense or even to move past the first read in the offense. He can really bog down, and that's something that happened with the Panthers a lot last year because if you look at the offensive numbers, they moved the ball a lot with him at quarterback, and there are really good reasons for that. And it's not just because they had really good receivers. It's because Teddy Bridgewater is very effective, between the 20s as far as getting the ball off quick into positive situations. I will also say, and this is going to come up later, he navigates the pocket better than he's given credit for. He is very far from a statue. He will do things as far as moving into space to keep himself alive and keep himself looking downfield that are better than, frankly, a whole lot of other quarterbacks. Teddy Bridgewater is absolutely a starting level player. If you're a Broncos fan, you'd be damn well pleased they bring him in and that the coaching staff is smart enough to see that he should be starting over Drew Lock. Speaking of Drew Lock, so Drew Lock is just bad. There are times where Drew Lock is going to look very good because he has the, traditional quarterback, crazy arm strength, throws a really tight spiral, that type of shit. But he is so unbelievably far away from an NFL decision maker that he just actively hurts the team. When he's on your offense, he will cause you to score less points and move the ball less, as it was shown with his entire starting tenure with the Broncos, especially last year when, frankly, this team has way more going for it offensively than they showed last year. Yeah, he's just a guy. He just doesn't put the ball into the right places, get the ball off on time into the right situations on offense. He will consistently skip things that are open. He will stare down receivers at times. He's not somebody who's going to move in the pocket very well, despite being kind of athletic. He just doesn't have the awareness of what's happening. Will be very, very turnover prone the entirety of his career, because when he does keep his eye downfield, the boy likes his risks. And as opposed to a guy like Baker Mayfield or something where the risks are like more like 50-50s and they can actually work out for your team, with Drew Lock, it's more like, that shit's kind of pipe dreams that he tries to take advantage of, and it very predictably does not go well when he does so. There is a chance if he was in a very, very good offense, he will put up numbers, and when he plays bad defenses will also put up numbers. Reminds me a lot of Daniel Jones in some ways, but that is not somebody that is going to capably win you games at quarterback ever. They also have Britt Rippon on the practice squad. He's actually kind of okay backup, but not super relevant in this scenario. At running back, so, this is kind of tough. It doesn't really matter, of course, but it is what it is. So I always talk about how there's only 8 to 10 running backs who actually matter in the NFL, who are any meaningful amount different than their peers and actually add value to your offense. Broncos are very far away from that. What they do have is Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon is just really mediocre as a running back. He does have some power to him. He is not like a slow poke. He can run, he can move average into a straight line. He's one of these guys. He fits in this gigantic middle category running backs where, if you gave him 20 carries on the Browns, he's going to put up dominant production. But that's where it ends. He's not somebody who's actually adding to your defense. He's never really creating yards for you as far as a guy who's making guys miss consistently or, exploding off of contact, that type of stuff. He's just not very good at it. He really doesn't force misses. It reminds me a lot of Leonard Fournette in a lot of ways, which is not a compliment, to say the least. So I'm not a fan of Melvin Gordon, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But they do also bring in rookie Javonte Williams. A ton of people are super excited about him. Would not surprise me at all if he was significantly better. Whatever, we'll see. They claim Nate McCrary off waivers, and Mike Boone actually on the practice squad. Or no, he's on IR, I believe. A reasonable player who is effectively the same thing as Melvin Gordon in a lot of ways, but doesn't really matter at this point. At wide receiver, now a lot of people are excited for this wide receiver room, and I understand why, but I'm not going to go that far. I have some level of hope for them, but I'm not going to get too much into it. What do we have individually here? We're going to start with Jerry Judy, actually, because he's my favorite one. He's the best one here. Jerry Judy showed skills as a rookie last year that were common with some of the best receivers in the entirety of the National Football League. I'm talking guys like Calvin Ridley. I was going to start off with Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, but he's not that good. But he importantly, though, is not that far away as far as a guy who consistently did the most valuable thing you can do on an NFL field as a receiver, which is get open. The dude moves so smooth down the field. He consistently, not just moves away from defenders, but causes defenders to shake, the wrong way, to shift their body rate the wrong way, and lets them get steps very, very consistently. And I would not be surprised at all if Jerry Judy ends up being one of the best receivers in the NFL. He is well on his way, frankly, right now. His problem, what keeps him low like this, one, he has obviously notorious drop issues. He did last year. Not something that was in college, and frankly, not something I'm all that worried about going forward. What I am worried, though, which relates to that, is I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who's making, a lot of contested catches. He's not going to be – he's just not going to handle physicality well down the field. His hands aren't particularly strong if he's asked to make, tough catches on third down, things in the red zone, that type of stuff. Not impressed with that. I don't think that's something he's ever really going to be very good at. Not that you need to be an amazing receiver, but I will say I do think that limits his crazy, super high-end potential. But overall, super useful player. Like I said, he's just going to get open so much, and if he just doesn't drop the ball, which I'm not all that worried about, you're looking at somebody who's a gigantic positive for your team. Then you have Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton is the type of player that I'm very much not a fan of in the modern NFL, very opposite to Jerry Judy. However, I do have to give him credit because for what he is, he's about as good as you're going to find. And that is, he's a true old school big body outside receiver who struggles to win inside of the numbers, but will win at a higher clip as far as making contested catches go or, being physical at the point of attack, that type of stuff than you're just going to see around most of the rest of the NFL. There are, Mike Evans, Julio type guys at the very, very top, that's not a fair comparison. But past those guys, Cortland Sutton's kind of as good as you're going to get, like I said. He does have some speed as an outside receiver, I will say, too. He's not a big plotting mess the way that the lower end of that style of receiver are. And while I talk generally about how contested catches are just such an inconsistent skill anyway, even in the best guys at that, you say they win, 55% of the time, whereas the middle pack wins like 51%. That's a very rough, example, but that's kind of representing of how they don't actually end up adding that much value as opposed to a guy like Jerry Judy where, he's getting open 9 out of 10 times, and a Tim Patrick also on the team, he's getting open like 1 out of 10 times. Again, extreme to illustrate the point, but that's what I'm getting at. Cortland Sutton, he is actually at least on the high end of that spectrum, the contested catch one. He's legitimately very, very good about that. He uses his hands super well. He has a crazy highlight package for a reason. Whatever. I don't want to spend all that much time about him. I think his ceiling is a little bit capped as a receiver because he's never going to be someone who's consistently getting open every play, but he's going to be useful. Very useful for a long time. Then you do have Tim Patrick, a player I am not a fan of whatsoever. He does fit it very much into that category of receiver I just talked about, where he's just too big and slow laterally to get open. Now, he did show real skill as a one-track running downfield receiver, who had some decent flashes of being able to track the ball and make some catches, and keep his concentration while running full speed. That stuff was nice, for sure. And it did play into the way Drew Lock plays football very well, because Drew Lock would just chuck the ball at him, and he did come down with it at times. And that is a useful skill, I suppose. However, I do question how consistently successful that would ever be. If you look at a lot of times what was happening there, I don't want to call it luck because that's not accurate, but it's not things that are particularly repeatable. It's not like he was getting wide open. It's not like he was stacking defenders all that well. It was just kind of a confluence of very well-placed balls at times and him being a lot bigger than a lot of corners, which is that part's going to be consistent. I really have issues with Tim Patrick as a starting receiver because he just doesn't get open enough to drive your offense up and down the field. He really struggles to win anytime inside of the numbers, that type of thing. So, whatever. Then you do have KJ Hamler. KJ Hamler wouldn't surprise me if he was the second best receiver on this team by the end of the year because he fits into that stuff that is really valuable in the NFL. That dude, and granted, not a gigantic sample size as a rookie, showed the ability to burn people like badly. He had plays where he was getting 5+ yards of separation, even against some reasonable competition from the inside. Mostly a slot player at this point, but it wouldn't surprise me if he could win from the outside because of how fucking fast he is. Now, he does struggle with physicality a little bit. He's kind of a little guy, but it wasn't something that was terrifying. It wasn't something I was like, oh, yeah, you can just press him out of plays or anything like that. It was a kind of small sample size. And overall, I think KJ Hamler was super, super useful. And he didn't even necessarily get to show off one of his reputed skills from college, being that he's super good after the catch, allegedly. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he's dominant in that aspect. Not something I want to assume. But, yeah, KJ Hamler, huge fan of. Super, super valuable player. Wouldn't surprise me if he's a lot better to me by the end of this year. Then you have Deonte Spencer. He's one of these returners who's kind of a returner only. His explosiveness on that side of the ball doesn't show up on offense, but whatever. I get, why he's on the team. Then we get to tight end. So here I'm going to come down a little bit. Noah Fant, former first-round tight end, is fine. He is absolutely useful. He is a starting level tight end, and he's going to do things on an NFL field that not all that many other tight ends do that do add value. He's a super athlete. He runs really, really goddamn fast in open space. If he's allowed to run in a straight line, again, for a tight end, he is zooming away, maybe better than any, I don't know, Jonnu Smith is up there maybe, and Evan Ingram, but the dude goes crazy. That's what got him drafted in the first round. And that does mean, and I will also give him, as an after-the-catch player, he's pretty goddamn good. Not only is he fast, he's also very strong in his legs. His balance is not anything to write off. He's not one of these big tight ends who's big for no reason, is just going down on contact. He will play through it. He plays very well in that aspect. Again, I think an overall very useful player. I do have issues, however, with him being any more than what he is now because I just don't see him winning in routes almost ever. He's not somebody who's creating a lot of separation laterally. While he is fairly explosive for a tight end position, isn't anything that is causing corners or, secondary players big issues. It's not like he's great about using his big body to get, body position, finding ways to make contested catches, finding ways to get open on third down, like that type of stuff. He's not horrible at it, but it's not really adding value in that aspect. So, yeah, he's fine. That one skill set he had is very, very, very useful for sure. I wouldn't surprise me if he got better at the other stuff, but frankly, I don't see him getting better by enough for him to be, one of these elite tight ends in the NFL. Granted, there's like 2 of them. So I will say that, whatever, Noah Fant I do like, and specifically as we'll talk about in this offense, I think is very, very, very useful. Albert Okwuegbunam, rookie out of Missouri last year, showed some really good flashes in a tiny sample size before he ended up getting hurt for the rest of the year. The dude, actually similar to Noah Fant, is kind of legendarily fast over like a 40-yard dash for a guy his size. Super, super fast. That athleticism does show up on tape as far as when he's running after the catch. And he showed some real things, again, small sample size, as a player who could move in the seam in like the intermediate levels of the field where you like your more athletic tight ends to win, that he can move like good down there, that he could get on his horse, he could get going, he could actually run away from not corners, but linebackers and some safeties a little bit. He also has reasonable ball skills at the very least. It might be a lot better than that. I like him a lot as a player, and I think there's a real chance he's super, super useful. Eric Saubert comes over, never been impressed with him. Granted, very small sample size. I actually don't feel comfortable speaking on him all that much. Austin Beck, actually kind of an okay fullback at times, but again, kind of whatever. So then we get to the offensive line. And, they're pretty good. We'll talk about how they work as a unit in a second, but as individuals, what do we have? So Garrett Bowles is a player that he's one of these guys that this is the way I'll describe it. His reputation used to be way, way below what he actually was as a player. And because of how good he was last year, now I think it's a little bit above where he is as a player. Garrett Bowles is absolutely good. He is a true starting tackle in the NFL. He has been for years, to make it clear, too. He is a guy who rarely gets beat in pass protection severely. He also adds neutral value as a run blocker, can do fine at the line of scrimmage, is never going to be the reason your team is bad on the offensive line. I will say, he is absolutely vulnerable to true outside speed rushers. If he catches a lot of them in his schedule, which is what was happening a couple of years ago on a fairly consistent basis, he will have issues keeping the edge without guys bending around him and getting at your quarterback's, back legs with the ball when it's going to pull, that type of stuff. That absolutely is an earned reputation. He does have struggles with that at times. Now, it takes very elite players to exploit that, to be very clear. And frankly, I don't think he's as bad as it looks. So what happened last year, according to most people, was they just stopped calling holding penalties on him because he used to have led the league, which, one obviously very much helps. I can't argue with that. But a lot of the holding calls from him before, actually, especially 2 years ago, were kind of suspect in the first place, if I'm being honest. And it made him look worse than he was. And overall, listen, the point is, Garrett Bowles is absolutely good. I have faith in him being an above-average tackle and a true starter-worthy player who I'm not concerned with outside of very specific matchups. At your other tackle spot, you bring in Bobby Massey from the Bears to start, which actually I like quite a bit. Bobby Massey is also a borderline starting level tackle, very much on the low end of that spectrum. But he's a guy who adds value as a run blocker. He's a big, strong guy who leans on dudes, who isn't a horrible lateral athlete, and he is going to help them in the run game. And as a pass protector, he has the same weakness that Garrett Bowles effectively. Now it's much, 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 much more pronounced, but he is a guy who can struggle with the true elite athletes who are going to get up and around him. Sure. Okay, but you can't always be great at every position. And while there are things that could have done better at right tackle, I suppose you could do a lot worse than Bobby. Many teams do a lot worse than Bobby Massey. So you're fine, whatever. Speaking of worse than Bobby Massey, you also bring in Cam Fleming. That one I don't really understand. He's just not a player who could start on your team and you be good. He's very prone to effectively anything any defensive lineman with any level of talent is going to do. Not somebody who's going to hold up in pass protection over any meaningful number of snaps. And as a run blocker, adds almost nothing. He's just kind of out there, and you're hoping it doesn't suck bad enough for your offense to be a zero. Not a good signing, whatever. Calvin Anderson, also not a player particularly impressed with. Very, very small sample size with him, but not somebody I'm really looking at as any level of impactful player. At guard, these two I want to talk about. These two are dope. This team has one of the best guard duos in the entirety of the NFL. Graham Glasgow specifically, one of the steals of free agency a couple years ago when he comes over from the Lions. That dude is nuts. He's so good. He's a borderline elite guard. He will bull people off the line of scrimmage. He will smack them like 5 yards off the ball very consistently. He does a lot of work in double teams. Is really, really, really good about that. He's also a reasonable athlete. He does, he's not amazing at that spot. There are better guys around the league, but whatever. He's still more than good enough at it to be a very useful player. And in pass protection, he's not somebody I'm ever worried about. There are times where his play strength that shows up in the run game doesn't necessarily show up so much when he's going backwards. I will fully admit that there are certain matchups, with like a Chris Jones, these true power interior guys that, whatever. It's not something, the point is, that I'm ever actually worried about. It's just kind of an interesting note that he's not perfect. And that's kind of what keeps him from the very elite tier. Then you have Dalton Reisner, fairly similar player. He just kind of never loses, though. He just always is doing his job at an above average level, is consistently adding value to your team on every snap that he plays for you across the entirety of the season. While he's not perfect, there are times where he can get a little bit run around. He's not a great athlete, especially laterally. It's nothing concerning. Again, he's somebody who does his job very effectively, very consistently. You have Natane Muti, who was a rookie last year, didn't really play as your backup there. Then it's center, Lloyd Koshyberry. So he was a rookie last year, and he went through rookie struggles for sure. He's not a high-end center, to be very clear, but he's a guy who, especially surrounded by the guards that he's surrounded by, is going to be a competent starter, I'm pretty comfortable saying. He does okay in the run game. He's got some strength to him, not super impressive, and I think most of the work ends up getting done is, in like doubles is by the guards next to him as opposed to him, but whatever, he's fine at it. And while he's not a high-end athlete, he's not anything awful. And so, yeah, he can do a job is kind of the point. Nothing crazy. He does worry me a little bit as a pass pitcher at sometimes, but at center, it's hard to be bad enough for me to really care all that much. And he definitely doesn't get that bad. You also have Quinn Miners, third round rookie. A lot of people like. We'll see about that one. So how does this offense work as a whole? Well, frankly, it's fine. It's not amazing, but when you look at this team, specifically how the parts work together, you're actually going to get some pretty good results, right? Because you have Teddy Bridgewater, basically who, remember, is going to be getting the ball off very, very, very quickly the vast majority of the time, right? So what's the most important thing in regards to that? It's interior pressure, or keeping interior pressure away, keeping a clean pocket in the middle so that he can step up, throw, and or not get affected in the first 2-3 seconds of a play, right? Because the thing with edge rushers is that it just takes them longer physically to get to the quarterback. And if the quarterback is throwing the ball quick enough, no matter how good they are, they just can't get to Teddy, who is one of these guys who fits so far up into the category of throwing the ball too quick, that stuff really matters. And interesting enough, on this team, they happen to opt into tackles who have the specific weakness that Teddy Bridgewater really helps mitigate. Because what these guys are specifically weak against is guys getting around the edge, which just takes longer, right? He is just going to throw the ball like too quick for them to lose most of the time, which is a really, really big positive, especially with a guy like Bobby Massey, who ends up fitting this offense pretty well because of that specific thing. Now, the other side of throwing the ball quickly is you have to have guys who are going to win quickly. And, they're fine there too. Jerry Judy is a guy I'm really encouraged about with that. KJ Hamler also is somebody who fits in that category. Cortland Sutton, while not great at it, is somebody who can take quick contested throws and or timing throws and do work with them because of how big and strong he is. And Noah Fant is a guy who's eating dump-offs and, moving into space as downfield receiver is really, really, really encouraging. So this team, despite not, having the high-end talent that I like with a lot of other teams around the league, actually, like I said, fits together super well, specifically with Teddy Bridgewater, our quarterback. And also, I want to bring up that this team did a lot of smart things schematically with their offense last year that kind of went underrated and or ignored because of Drew Lock either not executing them or because they would just get blown out anyway because of Drew Lock. This team did a lot of stuff. They used tight ends, especially very, very intelligently in the screen game. They throw a lot of, like reverse play action stuff that is almost on the borderline of trick plays, but not that wacky. That creates like a lot of openings. And Teddy Bridgewater, while he has all his issues, the nice thing about him is he's going to confidently execute those things the vast majority of the time. And I think there's a real chance this offense plays well above its talent level and is reasonable to good for sure. So is the defense enough to take that offense to the top? And They got a chance, man. You know, we're going to go through all these guys individually, but I'm going to just kind of spoil it at the beginning and say, it's hard to see a way this defense loses a lot of times. So what do we have individually? I'm going to start with my favorite player on this defense, Shelby Harris. One of the absolute most underrated players in the league. Shelby Harris is fucking nuts. He's so good. He's a monster on the interior. He consistently, very consistently beats guards and or tackles and gets into the backfield cleanly near the beginning of the play. That is a incredibly uncommon thing among defensive tackles, among interior rushers. It is up there with – so Aaron Donald's at the very top, right? Obviously. Then you have like Grady Jarrett and Chris Jones. Then is Shelby Harris. As a pass rusher, a defensive tackle, he is right there. And it really shows up like on a game-to-game basis. The dude even beats legitimately talented offensive linemen fairly consistently. And he, along with Calais Campbell and DeForest Buckner, form this holy trinity of dudes who just bat down every pass in their area code. It's wild how many passes the dude just gets his hands up and knocks down. Something that is kind of underrated about him, but is really, really useful, especially in certain matchups against certain quarterbacks. Shelby Harris is amazing. I love the dude. He's also a very plus run defender who consistently gets in the backfield as well as swinging point of attack. Then you have Mike Purcell at nose. You know, he does fit into this classical big fat nose tackle. He's not going to do much else. But in this defense specifically, you know, that's okay. Mike Purcell does that very well. He does not get moved off his spot ever. He offers nothing as a pass rusher, but again, oh well. Very useful at what he does. Then you have Dre'Mont Jones, another underrated player who's fucking dope himself. He is very good, especially in the run game, about using his hands to control offensive linemen. He would legitimately make plays, shed blockers, and be the guy who makes the tackle in the backfield and or affects the running back directly instead of just holding a gap and letting somebody else do it. He's also pretty strong at the point of attack. Dre'Mont Jones I'm a big fan of. While his pass rushing upside, I don't necessarily see obviously the way like Shelby Harris is. Even there, you know, he's a little bit encouraging. So Dre'Mont Jones, you know, awesome. Depth-wise, I do get a little bit concerned, especially compared to what they had last year with like DeMarcus Walker, who I think would really fit well on this team as a backup guy, but whatever. You have McTelvin Agim. He was a rookie last year, did not play very many snaps. Not somebody I was ever impressed with when he was on the field. Also wasn't like horrified, but not going to speak on him too much, not particularly impressed. You have Deshaun Williams as a backup nose tackle. He did play pretty well in a small sample size towards the end of the year. Again, really limited as far as just being a big fat run stopper, but that is a useful skill set to have, especially in nose tackle in this defense. The other one, Shmar Stefan, they bring in for God knows why, one of the absolute worst players in the NFL. If he's on the field, your team is worse for it. In every circumstance, he is incapable of doing anything positively. I know that sounds really horrible, but that is just the case. If you watch any time that the Vikings were playing last year, a gigantic part of the reason they were losing games despite being super talented and efficient, like everything pretty much, was because of how bad their defensive interior was, being Jaleel Johnson and Shmar Stefan. So there you go. That's not good. But whatever, the starters are awesome. And at edge, speaking of, your starters are goddamn awesome. You get Von Miller coming back. Now, can I guarantee Von Miller's going to be the same guy he was pre that injury? You know, obviously not. But I think there's quite a bit of evidence at this point that most of the NFL players come back from injuries as good, if not better, than they were previously. I mean, you know, in 2021, that just consistently happens. You know, look at a guy like Emmanuel Sanders, who's an old wide receiver, right, who tore his Achilles, which for the longest time, that is effectively a career ender. He comes back, and with the Saints, he's not every bit as good as he used to be, but still an elite player still a very, very good player who adds a ton of value. And that's, you know, as a player who was not nearly at the level Von Miller was. And there are other examples around there, whatever. The point is, I'm comfortable saying that Von Miller is still going to be very, very good. And what does he offer as a guy on the field? He is a dominant edge rusher who is right in the second tier of guys behind Myles Garrett and is going to consistently win off the edge as a true speed rusher and somebody who actually has power to beat tackles who are vulnerable with that. Has a ton of moves, has a ton of discipline, plays the run well. Von Miller, Hall of Famer for a reason. On the other side, you got Bradley Chubb. Bradley Chubb is very good. I think he gets a little bit overrated for some reason because I don't know, he doesn't like have the sack production to justify it or anything, but he's not like a high-end pass rusher. He's not somebody who's like individually going to lead a pass rush, as we saw again at times in his career. Now, he also missed the vast majority of last year, I believe. Maybe it was the year before. Either way, yeah, he is good. He's going to consistently win as a secondary pass rusher. He has an array of moves. He can beat different styles of tackles while not consistently or all that effectively, it is enough to be a relevant pass rusher, which is more than I'll say a lot of guys in the league. And he is a above average run defender who holds a point of attack well, is a superb athlete. That's what got him drafted in the top 5. And overall is a very useful player, again, especially as your number 2 rusher. Like, hell, all the way on board with that. As you say, I still am. That was kind of too negative for the way I feel about him. I have him in the top 20. He's a super useful player. Depth-wise, Malik Reed was fine last year. He ended up racking up sacks. If you look at all of them individually, a lot of those were more effort-based and or the quarterback kind of falling into him. Not to take all that much away from him. I do think he's a useful player. He did show some useful pass rush skills, especially as a rotational guy that I'm more than happy with being on the field. And actually, I think he was better as a run defender than I was expecting. He's a good player overall, whatever. Depth, past that, Jonathan Cooper, Andre Mintz, both rookies who are not all that highly thought of. We'll see, whatever. I don't know. But the top 3, you're chilling. And at outlaw linebacker, another set of good, real starting level talent. You have A.J. Johnson, who this team found off the, whatever wire a couple of years ago as a 27-year-old rookie who is a top 20 linebacker in the NFL. He's a super useful interior run defender between tackle to tackle. He's one of the best in the league. Consistently run fits very well. His play strength is through the roof. He's super good at taking on blockers at the point of attack and still making the tackle and or impacting the running back. And it's not like his range is limited to that. He's still a more or less modern guy as far as being able to move sideline to sideline and not get cooked because he's too slow. Like, A.J. Johnson is very useful. And even as a pass defender, while I don't love him there, you can work with it. It's not something that's like hampering your defense if the rest of it is good. And Josie Jewell, also a reasonable starter. He's definitely not as effective against the run, as more of a cleanup player than a guy who's actually making a difference in that area, but that's fine. He can do that job pretty well. And as a pass defender, he again is above average to be sure. He plays the middle of the field fairly well. He has okay zone instincts. Well, he's not a great athlete. He's good enough to react to what he sees. And overall, he's a starting level player for sure. Again, depth-wise, you start to struggle. Nobody really comfortable talking about, but then we get to corner, and this is the other real big one. Granted, every other position we talked about is very good too, and will continue to be. But this is the awesome one, given where they were last year. This team dealt with such bad corner play last year. Specifically, that last name on the outside corner, we'll talk about in a second. And it was because of injuries. Just like everyone was injured, basically. But not the case as of now. What do they have? They have a bunch of really fucking good players. So you have Kyle Fuller, who, again, you get a all-pro level corner almost from the Bears for free because they don't understand the salary cap, I guess. Kyle Fuller, specifically in this game too, his best years were with Vic Fangio as one of those outside corners in this kind of not soft zone. Actually, it's kind of the opposite, more of a tough playmaking zone that consistently rallies to the ball quickly. And Kyle Fuller is really, really, really good at that. He will take one side of the field. He will consistently cover even the best receivers in the NFL. And while he's never going to be a shutdown guy when you're going against the top level receivers, he can actually get that against the second, third tier, and he's going to meaningfully limit the impact of the high-end guys. I'm a huge fan of Kyle Fuller, especially in this system. Perfect. Then you bring in Ronald Darby. Him, I do have more issues with, to be sure. He does some positive things very consistently. He consistently sticks with even good receivers in the first, say, 5, 6, or there's maybe only 3-4 seconds of a route. He's a good athlete. He knows what he's doing. He's been around the NFL for a long time. He is a useful player for sure with that. What sketches me out about him is specifically that he will get really aggressive at times and will tend to want to take mad chances when he sees the quarterback pump fake in some way or sees a receiver cut in a certain way that he, believes, whether it's on film or from knowing the guy, that part I don't know, but he will bite on stuff way harder than a lot of other corners do, which can leave him exposed over the top more so than I'm completely comfortable with. However, that is a very unique case. It takes a good receiver to exploit him in that. And overall, Ronald Darby is a player who's goddamn good, especially as your number 2 corner. We've literally seen evidence of him being good enough to run that situation into an elite defense. Then you have highly drafted Patrick Zertain, who's shown a bunch of the preseason. He's a rookie corner. They're not very good most of the time, so I'm going to hold off on saying he's going to be amazing, but there is some hope with him for sure. Past that, I'll also talk about Michael Ojemudia, who is on IR, so we'll see if he plays. He's fucking awful. He was the guy I was mentioning earlier who was a primary culprit in this team being so bad defensively last year. He just doesn't stick to anybody, basically. He plays off-zone coverage by like 10 yards, but the problem is through the entirety of the play, he stays 10 yards away from the receiver, which can't figure it out. Doesn't exactly lead to him covering many people. Whatever. He's not going to see the field this year if any level of thing goes right for the Broncos, so who cares or whatever, but that one sucks. In the slot, though, I'm kind of bearing the lead with all these corner stuff. Bryce Calhoun, best slot corner in the NFL. Bryce Calhoun is goddamn awesome. He's another guy who fits in Vic Fangio's system perfectly, who's also dealt with injuries that's kept him from shining over the last couple of years. But when the dude's on the field, he is a absolute monster. He legitimately shadows. I get really excited talking about Bryce Calhoun. He's so good. He legitimately shadows even the best corner or receivers, even when they move into the slot. I'm talking if there's a slot corner that I could trust to cover a Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams when moved into the slot, it is him. Well, him and J.C. Jackson like tied for number one. They're both crazy good. But yeah, Bryce Callahan does that stuff very well. He has, despite being a small guy, real physicality to his game. He will play the catch point super, super well, which allows him to cover even tight ends, depending on the personnel of the offense. And Bryce Callahan just adds a ton of value to defense, again, especially in this scheme that he knows very well from being on the Bears and playing with Vic Fangio. Past that, you bring in Mike Ford as more of a special teams player or whatever. Isang Basie was a really, really bad rookie for most of the year. He did get a little bit better towards the end, kind of undersized, more of a classical nickel guy. Not super excited about him. He's also on IR, though. At safety, another super elite place. Justin Simmons, dude is dope. One of the best center fielding safeties in the entirety of the NFL. He is right there with Kevin Byard, with Marcus Williams as the best true center fielding deep safeties you're going to find. He legitimately makes plays in that area of the field very consistently. Super, super athlete. Has real ball instincts, ball skills, all that stuff. Justin Simmons is amazing. He's not amazing as a run defender, I will say, which keeps him, from being the best in the league. He's okay at it, whatever. He's not concerning, I will say. It's just not somebody who's going to consistently be making plays in the line of scrimmage the way that a Jamal Adams or something like that is. But, oh well, dude's awesome. Then Kareem Jackson. Again, he's so good. Kareem Jackson is one of the better safeties as far as covering tight ends you're going to find around the NFL, even at his age. At this point, he legitimately limits some of the better tight ends in the NFL as far as a guy who can stick with them in man coverage even. He's not, going to be out here amazing and pressing Travis Kelce out of a place. Don't think of it like that. But he's going to be with them, going to make plays at the catch point, all that type of stuff. He's a legitimately good run defender, especially for someone who used to be a corner. And overall, just a high-end starter at both safety spots, which is awesome to see. You have some rookies for depth there, whatever. But when you talk about this defense as a whole, man, where I come down is it's just how do you win if you're an offense consistently? Obviously any given play, there are things that can happen. But where do you attack on this defense to really have success? And it's so hard to do. As far as I'm concerned, I think it really takes you need a tackle duo that's good enough to cover Von Miller and Bradley Chubb without you having to do outlandish things to keep them from killing your quarterback. And then you need to combine that with the ability to have receivers who are good enough to beat Kyle Fuller and Ronald Darby, which is not easy to do. Ronald Darby is the one you can get there, but again, he's far from bad. He's a true starting corner. It's just you have to find somewhere, right? And I guess it's there. And that's assuming, by the way, that Patrick Zertain isn't a number one corner himself. So it's so tough, man. God. So yeah, when you look at the schedule, right? Does that stuff even come up offensively? I would argue there are two places in the first half of the year that I'm even concerned about if I'm the Broncos defense. That is the Browns in week 7, because they do have the offensive line to do stuff. They do have the receivers to win, especially down the field. When I talk about how good Odell is and that type of thing, plus how dominant the run game is. I don't care how good you are. You're not going to shut it down. And the other one is if the Cowboys are fully healthy at that point, they also have the tackle duo and offensive weapons to take advantage. Then besides that, you do catch the Chiefs, who no matter who you are going to be very effective offensively generally in the second half of the year. But that's it, man. Other than that, they're so good. And offensively, You got to look for things that can limit this team as well, especially given all the positive situations they're going to be in because of their defense. And it's kind of tough in of itself, right? You need a team who is going to rally to the ball very consistently and limit short things that Teddy Bridgewater is going to be happy to eat up yard and field position with. And, the Giants do play a good zone that does kind of fit that description. Talent-wise, though, I don't really think that they're all the way there, especially, again, considering the status of their offense. And past that, the Ravens – that one does worry me. The Washington football team does worry me. They're chilling mostly offensively. The only limitation is kind of Teddy himself as far as scoring in the red zone. So this team, I do see how they would struggle against the very, very high end of the AFC, specifically the Chiefs and Browns. Other than that, though, man, they're so good. Like all around, and they're going to be they're so good defensively, and their pieces fit so well offensively that it's really hard for me to see this team not being very consistently successful, assuming Teddy Bridgewater is their quarterback throughout the entirety of the year. And that's the 2021 Denver Broncos.